You brought me all the way here because of $1?
That dollar was never an insult, Miss Gallagher.
5,000 acres, this estate, and everything.
When a wealthy patriarch leaves his struggling, divorced daughter exactly $1 in his will, everyone expects tears of humiliation. Instead, she laughed. But 24 hours later, that single crumpled bill unlocked the iron gates to a hidden empire her greedy ex-husband would kill for. Buckle up. The rain in Chicago fell in heavy gray sheets, drumming relentlessly against the windows of the 40th floor conference room in the Willis Tower. Beatrice Gallagher sat near the edge of the sprawling mahogany table, her damp trench coat draped awkwardly over the back of an expensive leather chair. She felt entirely out of place in the sterile, high-end offices of Schiff Hardin LLP, a feeling only amplified by the suffocating silence in the room. At 34, Beatrice's life was a far cry from the opulent world her father, Winston Harrison, had inhabited. She was 2 years out of a brutal, soul-crushing divorce from a man who had drained her savings, taken the house in Evanston, and left her fighting for every scrap of stability to provide for their 7-year-old daughter, Lily. Beatrice drove a 2012 Honda Civic with a dent in the rear bumper and worked 50 hours a week managing a mid-sized branch of Chase Bank in Rogers Park. Winston Harrison, on the other hand, had been the founder and CEO of Harrison Global Logistics, a titan of industry whose net worth was estimated in the billions. He was also a man who had frozen Beatrice out of his life the moment she decided to study education instead of business, and further ostracized her when she refused to let his high-priced lawyers handle her divorce from Greg. Winston despised weakness, and to him, Beatrice's struggles were an unforgivable display of it. Across the table sat Penelope, Beatrice's half-sister. Penelope was 10 years younger, dressed in a sharp, tailored Chanel suit that probably cost more than Beatrice's annual salary. She was busy checking her phone, occasionally casting bored, condescending glances at Beatrice. Beside Penelope sat her husband, a smarmy investment banker named Richard, who looked like a shark waiting for chum to be thrown into the water. At the head of the table stood Lawrence Gable, Winston's longtime corporate attorney. He cleared his throat, adjusting his gold-rimmed glasses as he unsealed the thick, ivory-colored envelope containing the last will and testament of Winston Harrison. "Let us begin," Gable said, his voice devoid of any warmth. "I will skip the standard legal preamble and proceed directly to the distribution of assets, as instructed by the deceased." Beatrice didn't expect much. Perhaps a small trust for Lily's college tuition. That was the only reason she had taken a half-day off work to be here. She just wanted something to ensure her daughter wouldn't have to struggle the way she was struggling. Gable began to read. The numbers were staggering. Penelope was awarded the primary estate in Lake Forest, a penthouse in Manhattan, and the controlling shares of Harrison Global Logistics, effectively giving her a liquid net worth of over $800 million. There were donations to various conservative think tanks, a sizable severance package for Winston's executive staff, and even a $2 million trust left to his prize-winning Weimaraners. Penelope smirked, leaning back in her chair and crossing her legs. Generous, as always, she whispered to Richard, though loud enough for Beatrice to hear. Gable paused. He looked down at the document, then briefly up at Beatrice. For a fraction of a second, something resembling pity flickered in his cold eyes. "To my eldest daughter, Beatrice Gallagher," Gable read, his voice dropping half an octave, "I leave the sum of $1. This is not an oversight, but a precise calculation of what I believe her life choices have amounted to, and a final lesson in the value of the independence she so stubbornly demanded." The room went dead silent. Penelope clamped a hand over her mouth, unsuccessfully stifling a sharp snort of amusement. Richard coughed into his fist to hide his grin. Gable reached into his suit pocket, pulled out a crisp, single $1 bill, and slid it across the polished mahogany table. It stopped directly in front of Beatrice. Beatrice stared at the green paper. $1. George Washington stared back at her, indifferent. She thought of her cramped apartment. She thought of the past due notice on her heating bill sitting on her kitchen counter. She thought of Greg, her ex-husband, who had texted her just that morning, threatening to take her back to family court for a reduction in his already meager child support payments. The sheer audacity of the insult was breathtaking. It was a masterclass in cruelty, orchestrated from beyond the grave by a man who had never once attended a parent-teacher conference or asked how his granddaughter was doing. And then, something entirely unexpected bubbled up in Beatrice's chest. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. The corners of her mouth twitched. A low, breathy sound escaped her lips. Beatrice began to laugh. It started as a soft chuckle, but quickly grew into a full, genuine laugh, that echoed off the glass walls of the conference room. It was the laugh of someone who had finally realized the absolute absurdity of a rigged game. Penelope's smirk vanished, replaced by a scowl of deep offense. "What is wrong with you?" she hissed. "Are you hysterical?" "No," Beatrice said, wiping a tear of mirth from her eye as she stood up. "No, Penelope. I'm free. He's dead. You're exactly who he molded you to be, and I am officially unburdened from ever having to pretend this family meant anything to me." Beatrice reached down, picked up the single-dollar bill, and folded it neatly. She slipped it into the pocket of her trench coat. "Thank you, Mr. Gable," Beatrice said, her voice steady and clear. "I appreciate your time. Tell the dogs I say congratulations." Without another word, Beatrice turned and walked out of the room, her head held high. She took the elevator down 40 floors, stepped out into the pouring Chicago rain, and felt lighter than she had in years. She had nothing, but she also owed them nothing. The chapter was closed, or so she thought. The euphoria of her dramatic exit wore off by 8 p.m. that evening. Reality, as it always did, set back in with the mundane tasks of a single mother. Beatrice made macaroni and cheese for Lily, helped her with a second-grade math worksheet, and tucked her into bed with a story about a brave knight who fought dragons. By 11:30 p.m., Beatrice was sitting at her tiny kitchen table, nursing a cup of cheap peppermint tea, staring at her laptop screen. She was attempting to balance a budget that simply refused to balance. The $1 bill sat on the Formica counter, a mocking paperweight over a stack of bills. Suddenly, her cell phone buzzed, vibrating violently against the wooden table. The caller ID was blocked. Frowning, Beatrice answered. "Hello? Mrs. Gallagher? My apologies. Miss Gallagher?" The voice on the other end was deep, gravelly, and distinctly older. It didn't sound like a telemarketer. "Who is this?" Beatrice asked, instantly on guard. "My name is Thomas Abernathy," the man said. "I am, or rather, I was your father's private legal counsel. I need to speak with you immediately." Beatrice rolled her eyes. "If this is about Gable's little performance today, I already got my dollar, Mr. Abernathy. You can close the file. I'm not contesting the will. I want absolutely nothing to do with Harrison Global. Mr. Gable handled your father's public affairs, Miss Gallagher. He is entirely unaware of my existence, just as he is unaware of your father's private affairs," Abernathy replied, his tone urgent and hushed. "The event at Schiff Harden today was a necessary theater, a legal decoy." Beatrice paused, her finger hovering over the end call button. "What are you talking about?" "The dollar, Miss Gallagher." "Do you still have it?" "Yes, it's sitting on my counter. Look at the serial number." Beatrice frowned. Putting the phone on speaker, she reached over, unfolded the crisp bill, and squinted at the green ink under the dim fluorescent kitchen light. It says, "G. Tam born hai chin mort mort hong ko." A sharp exhale of relief came through the phone. "Thank God you didn't spend it or throw it away. Miss Gallagher, that $1 bill is not an inheritance. Under the strict terms of a blind trust established in the state of New York 40 years ago, it is the exact, legally binding consideration required to execute a quitclaim deed on a holding corporation known as the Providence Trust." Beatrice's mind struggled to catch up. Consideration? Like a purchase price? "Exactly," Abernathy said. "Your father knew that if he left his true wealth to you in a public will, Penelope and her husband would immediately tie it up in probate court for a decade, slowly bleeding you dry with legal fees until you surrendered. He also knew your ex-husband, Greg, is heavily indebted to some very dangerous private equity firms and would relentlessly come after you if he saw a public windfall. Your father needed a way to transfer his most vital assets to you, completely off the grid." Beatrice's heart began to hammer in her chest. "My father hated me. He told me I was a failure." "Your father was a complicated, deeply paranoid man," Abernathy countered gently. "He pushed you away because he believed his world was toxic. When you left, when you stood on your own 2 feet and took the hard road, You proved you were the only person in his life who couldn't be bought. Penelope is his public legacy. You, Beatrice, are his true successor. I don't understand. You will, but we cannot discuss this on an unsecure line. I have chartered a private jet at Midway Airport. It departs in 3 hours. Pack a bag for yourself and your daughter. I am coming to pick you up. Tonight? I can't just leave. I have work tomorrow. Lily has school. Miss Gallagher, Abernathy interrupted, his voice dropping to a deadly serious whisper. By tomorrow morning, the shell companies controlled by Richard and Penelope will begin auditing your father's private ledgers. When they realize the crown jewels of the Harrison Empire are missing, they will look for the leak. If you do not legally take possession of the Providence Trust, by physically placing that specific dollar bill into the master ledger at the estate by sunrise, the trust dissolves, and everything reverts to Penelope. You must come now. Beatrice looked at the $1 bill. The face of George Washington seemed a lot less indifferent now. It felt heavy. It felt like a loaded gun. She thought about her life. The endless, grinding poverty. The fear of the next unexpected expense. The suffocating grip her ex-husband still tried to maintain over her peace of mind. "Give me 30 minutes," Beatrice said. An hour later, Beatrice and a sleepy, confused Lily were sitting in the plush leather back seat of a blacked-out Lincoln Navigator. Thomas Abernathy sat in the front, a silver-haired man in a bespoke tweed suit, holding a leather briefcase on his lap like a shield. They boarded a Gulfstream G650 at a private hangar in Midway. As the jet cut through the stormy night sky toward New York, Abernathy opened his briefcase. "Where exactly are we going?" Beatrice asked, wrapping a cashmere blanket around a now-sleeping Lily. "The Hudson Valley," Abernathy replied, pulling out a thick file folder, specifically, a private, unmapped peninsula near Cold Spring. "The estate is called Blackwood Manor. No, excuse me. We rebranded it years ago to avoid local scrutiny. It is known locally only as the Ironwood Reserve. It is 5,000 acres of heavily wooded land, bordered by the Hudson River to the west and a private mountain ridge to the east. It is completely self-sustaining." 5,000 acres? Beatrice gasped. "How do you hide 5,000 acres in New York?" "By buying the local township's silence through generations of aggressive philanthropy and wrapping the land in layers of agricultural and conservation easements," Abernathy explained with a rare, thin smile. "Your father bought it through a proxy 40 years ago. It has never appeared on any Harrison corporate tax return." The flight was a blur of anxiety and exhaustion. By the time they landed at a small private airstrip in Dutchess County, the sky was beginning to turn a bruised pre-dawn purple. Another black SUV was waiting. They drove for nearly an hour through winding, densely forested roads. The GPS on the driver's dashboard simply showed a blank, gray void. Eventually, they reached a towering set of wrought iron gates deeply embedded in high stone walls covered in thick, dark ivy. Abernathy rolled down the window and punched a 12-digit code into an ancient, rusted keypad. The massive gates groaned, sliding open to reveal a long, sweeping driveway lined with centuries-old oak trees. At the end of the drive, shrouded in the morning mist, sat a breathtaking 1920s stone manor. It looked like a castle pulled straight from a Gothic romance, with slate rooftops, towering chimneys, and massive leaded glass windows. Beatrice stepped out of the car, the gravel crunching under her cheap boots. She stared up at the magnificent structure, her breath catching in the crisp autumn air. "Welcome to Ironwood, Miss Gallagher," Abernathy said, standing beside her. "Your new home, assuming you have the payment." Beatrice reached into her coat pocket, her fingers brushing the crisp edge of the $1 bill. "I have it." "Good," Abernathy said, his expression turning grim. "Because taking ownership of this house is the easy part. It's what is hidden inside that is going to cause a war." The heavy oak front doors of Ironwood Manor swung inward on silent, well-oiled hinges. As Beatrice stepped over the threshold, she fully expected to be greeted by the stale, musty smell of an abandoned house. Instead, the air was warm, carrying the faint, comforting scent of cedarwood, beeswax, and old paper. The grand foyer was magnificent. A sprawling double staircase made of rich mahogany swept up to a second-floor gallery. Crystal chandeliers, currently dimmed to a soft amber glow, hung from the vaulted ceilings. Oil paintings of landscapes, not family portraits, Beatrice noted, adorned the silk-lined walls. The house was immaculate, clearly maintained by a silent, unseen staff. "Mr. Abernathy, who keeps this place running?" Beatrice asked, her voice hushed with awe. A skeleton crew of caretakers bound by strict non-disclosure agreements and ironclad pensions, Abernathy replied, guiding her past the staircase and down a long, dimly lit corridor. They answer only to the trustee of the Providence Trust, which, in about 5 minutes, will be you. He led her into a massive library that smelled of old leather and pipe tobacco. Bookshelves stretched 2 stories high, accessible by brass rolling ladders. In the center of the room sat an imposing antique desk carved from black walnut. Abernathy walked behind the desk and pressed his thumb against a concealed biometric scanner hidden beneath the edge of the wood. A soft click echoed through the silent room, and a section of the oak paneling on the far wall seamlessly popped open, revealing a heavy steel vault door. Beatrice instinctively took a step back, pulling Lily closer to her side. "What is this?" "The heart of the Harrison Empire," Abernathy said. He spun a dial on the vault, entered a code, and heaved the heavy metal door open. Inside was a small, climate-controlled room containing rows of safety deposit boxes and a single glass-encased pedestal in the center. Resting on the pedestal was a leather-bound ledger. "Bring the dollar, Beatrice," Abernathy instructed. She walked into the vault, her pulse thumping in her ears. The ledger was open to a page filled with dense, handwritten legal script. At the bottom was a blank line next to the word consideration. "Place the bill on the glass, directly above the ledger," Abernathy said, pulling a heavy, custom-made stamp from his pocket. Beatrice withdrew the folded dollar, smoothed it out, and laid it flat on the glass. Abernathy pressed the heavy metal stamp down onto the bill, imprinting a permanent, dark red wax seal bearing the crest of the Providence Trust right over George Washington's face. "Done," Abernathy breathed, stepping back. As of this exact second, time-stamped 6:14 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, the Providence Trust is fully vested. You, Beatrice Gallagher, are the sole proprietor of Ironwood Estate. Beatrice stared at the sealed dollar. "Okay, I own a giant, secret house in the woods. But how does this protect me from Penelope? And what did you mean earlier when you said it's what's hidden inside that will cause a war?" Abernathy gestured to the rows of safety deposit boxes lining the vault walls. "Your father built Harrison Global Logistics into a multi-billion-dollar titan, yes. But moving boxes and shipping containers was merely the public face of his wealth. Decades ago, your father began heavily investing in advanced materials engineering and proprietary tech patents. He believed the future wasn't in transporting goods, but in revolutionizing the energy used to transport them. He unlocked one of the boxes and pulled out a thick sheaf of blueprints and legal patents, laying them on the glass pedestal. These boxes," Abernathy continued, his eyes gleaming, contain the original, unfiled patents for a new type of solid-state battery technology. It is a proprietary chemical composition that your father's private R&D team perfected 3 years ago. It yields 10 times the energy density of current lithium-ion models, with zero risk of combustion. It is, quite literally, the holy grail of the electric vehicle and renewable energy industries. Beatrice's eyes widened. She wasn't a business mogul, but even she understood the magnitude of what he was saying. "How much is this worth?" "If taken to market, the initial valuation estimates put the IP alone at roughly $40 billion, Abernathy said flatly. Beatrice felt the blood drain from her face. She gripped the edge of the glass pedestal to steady herself. 40 billion? Yes, but there is a massive problem, and it is the reason you are here, Abernathy said, his tone darkening. Your father funded this research through a labyrinth of shell corporations to keep it hidden from the board of directors at Harrison Global. Penelope and Richard know the money is missing from the corporate ledgers. They think your father embezzled his own funds to hide cash offshore. So they don't know about the tech? Not exactly. They know something of immense value exists, and they have hired a team of aggressive corporate mercenaries to find it. And unfortunately, they are not the only ones looking. Abernathy pulled a photograph from the file folder and slid it across the glass. Beatrice looked down and felt a cold spike of pure dread pierce her stomach. It was a surveillance photo taken outside a diner. The man in the picture was smiling, shaking hands with a man in a sharp suit. Greg, Beatrice whispered, staring at the face of her ex-husband. What does Greg have to do with this? When Greg divorced you, he didn't just walk away with your savings, Abernathy explained softly. He leveraged the insider knowledge he gained while married to you, small details about your father's private trips to New York, snippets of conversations he overheard. Greg has been working as an off-the-books consultant for Apex Holdings. Beatrice knew that name, Apex. That's the massive private equity firm. The one trying to buy out Harrison Global. Precisely, Abernathy nodded. Apex wants a hostile takeover of your father's company. Greg went to them and sold them a theory that Winston Harrison was hiding a massive, off-the-books asset in the Hudson Valley. Greg convinced them that if they find it, they can use it as leverage to crush the Harrison board and seize the entire company for pennies on the dollar. Beatrice felt a wave of nausea. Greg hadn't just ruined her past, he was actively hunting her future. He was a parasite, willing to sell out her family's legacy to the highest bidder just to line his own pockets. "Why didn't my father just file the patents?" Beatrice asked, her voice shaking slightly with anger. "Why leave this mess to me?" "Because your father was diagnosed with terminal pancreatic cancer right as the technology was finalized," Abernathy said gently. "He knew that if he filed the patents while he was dying, Penelope and Richard would instantly control them upon his death. They would sell the tech to oil cartels or competitors to be buried, taking a quick payout rather than changing the world. Your father wanted this technology to see the light of day, but he needed someone with the moral fortitude to shepherd it. Someone who couldn't be bullied." Abernathy pointed to the sealed $1 bill. "He left you the dollar as a final test. If you had thrown a tantrum, if you had ripped up the bill in anger, or if you had immediately hired a lawyer to sue Penelope for a larger piece of the pie, I was instructed never to contact you. The trust would have dissolved, and the patents would have been incinerated." Beatrice stared at the older lawyer. Her father, the cold, distant billionaire, had orchestrated this entire elaborate high-stakes game of chess, betting everything on the one trait she had, that he had supposedly hated, her stubborn independence. "So, what happens now?" Beatrice asked, pulling her shoulders back. The fear was still there, but a new, unfamiliar heat was rising in her chest. It felt like power. "Now?" Abernathy smiled, a genuine predatory smile. "Now, we prepare for war. Greg and Apex Holdings are petitioning the state to run eminent domain land surveys across the Hudson Valley, looking for this exact estate. Penelope's lawyers are tearing apart your father's life, looking for the missing billions. They both think they are hunting a ghost. They have no idea that as of this morning, the ghost has a name, and she holds all the cards." Just then, Abernathy's cell phone rang, a sharp, intrusive sound in the quiet vault. He checked the screen, and his smile vanished. He answered, listened for exactly 3 seconds, and hung up. "Miss Gallagher," Abernathy said, his voice tight. "It seems our timeline has accelerated. The local township just approved a private survey team to access the western ridge of the Ironwood property line. The team is funded by Apex Holdings. They will be at the perimeter gate in less than an hour." Beatrice looked down at her sleeping daughter, then back at the vault full of world-changing secrets. She had spent the last 2 years running from Greg, letting him dictate the terms of her miserable life. She reached down, picked up the sealed $1 bill, and slid it safely into her pocket. "Mr. Abernathy," Beatrice said, her voice dropping to a cold, steady register she didn't know she possessed. "Let's go meet my ex-husband's survey team. It's time to show them who owns this land." The morning mist rolling off the Hudson River was thick and freezing, clinging to the towering oaks of the Ironwood Reserve like a damp shroud. Beatrice sat in the passenger seat of a dark green Land Rover Defender, navigating the treacherous, unpaved logging road that marked the western boundary of the estate. Beside her, Thomas Abernathy drove with the practiced precision of a man who knew every hidden rut and route on the 5,000-acre property. They reached the perimeter just as the sun began to bleed through the gray overcast. Through the heavy foliage, Beatrice saw them, a convoy of 3 matte black Ford Explorers parked aggressively against the rusted iron mesh of the secondary gate. A team of 6 men in high-visibility jackets were unloading surveying tripods, heavy-duty bolt cutters, and a pair of commercial drones. And standing in the center of it all, holding a thermos of coffee and barking orders, was Greg. Seeing her ex-husband in his expensive Patagonia vest and designer boots sent a familiar, sickening jolt of anxiety through Beatrice's chest. For years, this man had belittled her, financially abused her, and convinced her she was incapable of surviving without him. He was the reason she checked her bank account in a cold sweat every morning. But as her hand instinctively drifted to the pocket of her coat, brushing against the heavy wax seal on the $1 bill, the anxiety evaporated. It was replaced by a cold, crystalline fury. "Stay in the car, Miss Gallagher. I will handle this," Abernathy said, reaching for the door handle. "No," Beatrice replied. Her voice was terrifyingly calm. "He's mine." She stepped out of the Land Rover, the cold mud squishing beneath her cheap boots. The slam of the heavy car door echoed like a gunshot in the quiet forest. The survey team paused. Greg turned around, a scowl forming on his handsome, arrogant face. When he recognized her, the scowl morphed into a look of absolute, comical bewilderment. "Beatrice?" Greg sputtered, taking a step forward. He looked from her to the Land Rover, then back to her face. "What in the hell are you